Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Taoiseach, Tánaiste, Bono. Thanks for wearing a jacket today. I feel so good.
Especially for you.
Loretta, Declan, Mr. Walsh, Madam Moderator, ladies and gentlemen. A couple of days ago, I received a call from America's Secretary of State. And in a voice, alas, I have heard all too often over the last 36 years. There was a stern reprimand coming. I could feel it. You know, she has a traveling job and only gets to come home on the weekends. So she said, I hear you're going to be gone this weekend. Where are you going? I said, the Taoiseach called and asked me to come to Ireland to talk at an economic conference. She said, oh, well, good. So I went from being a dunce to a hero instantaneously. And my family, second only to America, we love this country. And we believe in you. And I was honored to be asked to come here. We have a vast number of the Irish diaspora in this crowd and a lot of citizens of Ireland. About a year or so ago, I came and spoke to a big group in Dublin and spent several hours in the north trying to help them develop a strategy to work through this terrible difficulty in which we find ourselves. I had to begin by apologizing that this whole mess began in the United States. And the challenges before us are actually not all that dissimilar. But what happened in America in some ways presents a more profound difficulty than you face, because even before the financial crisis occurred in September of 2008, we had been in recession for a year, and all of our growth in the past decade was in consumer spending, housing, and finance, with the result that more and more money kept getting pushed to the top in America with fewer and fewer jobs, very few increases in incomes among middle-income working people. And the people handling that money, I don't want to demonize them. They had a fiduciary responsibility to try to figure out how to make some money with the money. And there was no money to be made in the old-fashioned way, providing new equities for companies so they could expand their operations and hire more people, or providing corporate bonds to do it. So we began to have even more speculation in the housing market and other things. What happened here was somewhat more straightforward. You had an enormous boom in property that followed your rising prosperity as a great exporting nation, as a country that built the most successful economy in Europe. And now we are where we are. I'd like to say a few things to support what the Taoiseach has already said. I know a lot of people in Ireland are discouraged, particularly those that don't fit particularly very well with the current global economy and what's happening. But the rest of the world thinks you're pretty great. And you need to play on that. Every year your ranking goes up in the World Economic Forum's list of the most competitive countries. You just got a very good rating from the IMF because your export sector has recovered briskly. You have one advantage we share with you. You have the youngest workforce in Europe. And there is a European baby boom, and there's one in Japan, and it's a big advantage in America too. You're about the only country in Europe with any real economic SWOT that has an even younger workforce than we do. And with all the problems America has with the looming retirement of the baby boomers, of which I am, alas, in the vanguard, I'm the oldest of the baby boomers. As long as we keep letting immigrants in, we're going to be all right. So you have all these assets. You've proved that you can manufacture sophisticated things. You've proved that you can master the information technology revolution. Your internet download speeds, broadband download speeds, are much faster than ours. You have a lot going for you. But unemployment is still persistently high. You still have the mortgage problem, although you have proposals to deal with it. And so we're here to figure out how we can help you get out of this. And it's very important for this reason. If you go back 500 years, go back to the tulip bubble and bust in the Netherlands in the 17th century. Throughout history, financial collapses take somewhere between 5 and 10 years to get over, whereas the traditional business cycle recession takes normally between a year and 2 years, and sometimes even less, to get over. But you have all these advantages, and you have the diaspora that adores you. Witness the amount of American investment in Ireland and the amount of two-way trade and all the things that you know about. So I think it's very important now that you have given this incredibly broad-based government a great mandate that everybody, first of all, has a realistic appreciation of what the challenge is. If you return to a full employment economy, one day, less than 5 years, you beat a 500-year trend. On the other hand, I think it's very important that younger people, and I don't mean just teenagers and young people who aren't in university, I mean disappointed young business people in their early 40s, understand that it was against all human nature to assume that nothing bad would ever happen to Ireland, even though we never wanted it to happen. That there's no such thing as an unbroken line in the life of a country or a person. And sort of being despairing is not an option. It's just a decision to be disappointed. Bob Strauss, who for many years was the chairman of the Democratic Party, used to tell a joke about every time somebody asked him why he took an instant dislike to someone, he said, because it saves me so much time. So if you are instantly disappointed, it saves you a lot of time, but it's a decision to live with disappointment. And I think a lot of, we were talking before we came in here, I think right now the world thinks more of Ireland than many Irish think of their own country. There's not a single person who knows anything about the global economy who lives outside of Ireland who has a moment's doubt that you will recover from this. The question is how quickly and how. So I will resist my normal temptation to be almost maudlin every time I come here and try to say some very specific things. This country made a big macroeconomic decision when you made up your mind that you would save your financial structure and not be seen as defaulting on your debt. And I'm sure it made a lot of people mad because they thought we're helping people who profited out of our misery. It was the right decision. Made people want to be here more. Now you have one more big economic decision, which, and I just got briefed by your leaders on it, and it's the same decision America hasn't made. But you're further than we are down the road. You've already decided you're not going to try to throw many homeowners out of their homes. But when you carry around as much unresolved debt as we have and you have because of the housing crisis, it's almost impossible to return to a full employment economy because your own people are afraid to spend. They actually save more, which is a personal virtue, but a collective problem in a downturn in which interest rates are virtually zero and there's not enough demand. So even if you recapitalize the banks, they're reluctant to lend and people are reluctant to borrow. The only way to do it is to deleverage the economy. So the government has come a long way on this, and they are looking at a variety of options. There are 15 ways to do that, in which people who have to make a little sacrifice now to deleverage and to work out the mortgage terms, whether you lengthen the term of the mortgage or whatever you do to try to just clean this debt up, can get it back on the back end as the value of housing goes up and the country returns to full health. But I know that they're dealing with it, so when the decisions are made and the proposals are put forward, just remember this. It just depends on whether you want to beat the 5-year average. Japan spent $2 trillion on infrastructure projects. Good ones, by the way, which will add to its long-term productivity and help it for 30, 40 years into the future. Kept a lot of people working. They had a 20% personal savings rate. But when their banks collapsed in 1990, a decade later, they had not yet returned to a full employment, high-growth economy because they could never figure out how to deleverage and work through all this debt. So without even knowing the details of what they'll wind up proposing, I support it. Because there is no perfect solution. Someone will be disappointed. Somebody has to give a little today to get tomorrow. But I'm telling you, I want you to beat the 5 years. And you can read, you don't have to take my word for it. You can go down to any of the university libraries and dig out old economic tomes. You can go back 500 years. It takes 5 years to get out of these things, or 10 years, because it's always politically difficult to deleverage when you've got excess debt. But if you don't, then even the best Irish entrepreneurs, particularly those that have markets in Ireland, have to get up every day and walk around with chains on their legs. So that's the first thing I want to say. I'm for it, and I don't even know what they're going to propose. But if it helps you to accelerate this, you'll be doing something that most countries have not had the sense, the courage, or the political will or ability to do. And the United States has to do it too, if we want to beat the 5 years. Now, the second thing I'd like to say is, you've done really great with exports, but if you're looking at look at the headlines recently about how Germany's economy is slowing down. The Germans the United States is the biggest trading country in the world if you count goods, services, and remittances, because we have so many immigrants that are sending, like Haiti's, 20% of Haiti's GDP comes from Haitians working abroad, most, but not all, in the United States, sending the money home. But exports in goods, we've already been surpassed by China, but also by Germany, much smaller than the United States. They got back into the Chinese market quickly because they had this lightning-fast system to monitor every emerging demand and to get even the smallest manufacturing family businesses to meet it quickly. Ireland's done a really good job of the export thing. That's why you got cited for it by the IMF. And you've done a good job of breaking into the Chinese market. But they're not the only rising economy out there that you should have a relationship with. You can do a lot for the Indians. Biggest democracy on earth, largest middle class on earth, and the largest number of really poor people on earth are all in India. They beat a government there a few years ago that had produced 3 years in a row of 9% growth or better. And the government was defeated for the simple reason that they couldn't figure out how to go from 9% of the growth, 100% of which went to 35% of the people that lived in their prosperity clusters, to the other 65% of the country. They need all kinds of infrastructure help. They need other kinds of help And I think there are opportunities there for Ireland. Brazil is the most environmentally responsible big country, rising country on earth. 95% of their electricity comes from clean energy, and this is the fourth year in a row when they will run their cars with more biofuel than gasoline. But they have a lot of challenges managing their growth. There are opportunities there. So the first thing I would say is, before you worry only about your problems, do what you're good at. You're good at exporting, find some place you're not exporting to. And bring more people into the circle of exporters. The reason the Germans can have 46% of their GDP tied to exports is that they have a higher percentage of small firms exporting than any other country. And they really haven't done very much in services. You're actually doing more in services than virtually every country in the world. But for whatever it's worth, I believe that. The second thing is, if you want to bring back manufacturing, it will require very aggressive government policies. Manufacturing is no longer a free market activity, not anywhere. China just passed a second $34 billion subsidy to try to capture the green technology market of the future. Makes me crazy when American congressmen talk about getting rid of anything we do, because we have a lot of advantages over them if we maximize it. So I think that, you've gotten a lot of investment here because the corporate income tax is only 12.5%. But if you want to stake out specific technologies in which you have a particular strength, there should be broad public support from the right to the left for government policies that recognize that this is not a free market activity anymore entirely. The government has to be in the mix. The third thing I would say is that I think the American diaspora can do even more, and I think, keep in mind, and I'm talking against my own country's interest here a little bit, but American companies, or American-based multinationals, now have $2 trillion in cash reserves that they have not yet committed to invest in the United States, to invest in Europe, to invest in Asia, or to buy back stock and otherwise do things that would increase the incomes of the people running them. They're trying to figure out what to do. So there's money there. While you're figuring out how to resolve the mortgage issues and what to do about it and how to loosen up bank lending and all that sort of thing, I think you ought to target the companies, and you already have a lot of big companies here, but I think you ought to target the ones that you know are rolling in dough. And I can say it without really hurting America's interest, because most Americans don't know the difference in our interest and yours. And because we got 100 times more people. But I think you ought to do this. Not all foreign investment opportunities are equal. These are people are sitting on money now and have not decided what to do about it, and know you are a competitive country, and know they can trust you. And I think there should be a very specific strategy on that. I would just like to say one or two other things, and I'd like to thank all my friends from the United States who are here. This summer, I did something I'd never done before because of the similar sense of helplessness so many Americans feel. We had a meeting of our global initiative early, focused only on America and creating jobs in America. And just by getting people together, we got $12 billion worth of investment commitments that'll create 150,000 jobs. That's a lot of jobs for us now. And so therefore, Taoiseach, if you're at all interested, I'd be happy to host a meeting like this in the United States. And Declan said he would help. I'm sure every other American here would help. We'd like to do this to try to bring together people who may, including those who may not be part of the Irish diaspora, to see what they could do to help. I basically think for every country, the decisions are the same. There are basically two big decisions you got to make. Number one is, how can you deleverage and get your macroeconomics in order? And number two, what are the 2 dozen or 3 dozen or 4 dozen things you have to do, because there's very rarely a silver bullet that will take you back to normal. And this is just unfortunately not one of those things where somebody can come in and give a speech and somebody else can go pass a law and everything's hunky-dory. There are dozens and dozens of things we need to do, and those things have to be worked out by people like you working together and exploring opportunities and seeing how to do them. So if you are willing, I'd be happy to do that. And Declan said that he would help us. Now, let me just say, then one other piece of advice I have that you're already a little ahead of me on, as you know, because we talked about it, is I think that every country that's in trouble today should look internally at what sources of revenues and what opportunities for work could be put together that presently have not been maximized. And the easiest thing to do for any developed country, which I would include the United States and Ireland, is to put people to work changing the way we consume or produce energy. One of the reasons this whole climate change debate has been so off-kilter is that there hasn't been enough focus on how to make it good economics. According to a Deutsche Bank study, in this last decade before their meltdown, you know, Germany surpassed the United States and Japan to become the #1 producer in the world of photovoltaics and the #1 deployer of it. They've now been overtaken by China, but anyway, they did it, and China has 1.2 billion people, and Germany has 80 million. I mean, it's amazing they did this. And they did it with heavy subsidies, and according to the Deutsche Bank study, even discounting for the economic drag of the subsidy, they netted 300,000 new jobs. Another firm did a study that had a narrower measure and said they netted 140,000 jobs. That's still nothing to sneeze at. This is really important. Let's see, my good friend John and Maureen Sweeney here, the AFL-CIO, his successor, Richard Trumka, committed at this meeting we had in Chicago to raise $10 billion to finance building retrofits in America. And they're going to pension funds and other funds that in the hands of public and private union employees. Stock market last week closed lower than it was the day I left office. The pension funds have to be invested in ways that will maximize return, but also maximize safety. You can get a guaranteed 6% return at a time when America can borrow money for under 2% with all of our debt. By putting people to work, modernizing every school, every university building, every hospital building, every big commercial building without indebtedness, and let them pay it off as you provide already in Ireland, only on their utility bill, only from savings. So, and I'll give you what the numbers are. If you retrofit a building and you cut the utility bill 20%, even if you borrow the money to do it, as I'm talking, and then pay it back plus interest in savings, you can pay it back typically in a year and a half. If you get up above 35%, it typically takes 5.5 years. If you get above 40, it'll take 6 or 7, after which your utility bill drops and you've just given like a mini power plant back to your local utility so they don't have to spend as much of your money to build new plants to provide energy. Every $1 billion spent on this generates 7,000 to 8,000 jobs, depending on whether you're retrofitting very large buildings or small ones. Ironically, the smaller the buildings, including homes, the more jobs you create. It's very hard to get that kind of return on anything else. And you've run this good infrastructure program, but you still have these budget targets to meet. It's hard to continue that. This doesn't require any government money, and it pays for itself. And every country in the world can do it. I do this work all over the world. And I'm just telling you, if you've got somebody that'll finance it, you can guarantee them a return. Bonded contractors will guarantee the savings to get the work and to keep their employees working or bring them back. And in addition to that, the AFL-CIO has promised to train another 140,000 people in this work. So for whatever it's worth, that's everywhere I go, even in countries nowhere near as well off as Ireland, everywhere I go, I see opportunities to do this. And we're working in Asia and Latin America and in some European countries to do this. So I recommend that you take what has already been done and accelerate it dramatically. You can create lots of jobs. And it's something people can see and feel. And it pays back for 20, 30, 40 years. The last thing I'd like to say about this is that I've never ever worried about the long-term future of Ireland, and I'm not now. But it bothers me that the deepest despondency seems to be among the non-university educated young who have a hard time getting jobs, and younger business people, and they're from like 30 to 45, who never knew anything but prosperity and got blindsided by what happened. The other night, Loretta and I were at a dinner in New York. Some other people who were probably there. We're trying to raise money for the University of Limerick to establish a chair in honor of the late Frank McCourt. And I suggested that when we establish this chair, the first thing they ought to do is start conducting a huge number of oral histories in Ireland, starting with people over 80 before they die, so they can tell the story of how Ireland emerged from abject poverty to the enormous prosperity and having the fastest growing economy in Europe before this financial crash. And that it be widely publicized all over Ireland, because I think too many young people feel like a failure because they had never known collective failure. There are a lot of people that are putting this on themselves when they really didn't do anything to be responsible for the challenges they are facing. And I can tell you, when you want to get, no matter how good your leaders are, if you have a strategy that requires you to do two big macroeconomic things, save the financial system, check, you did that, and then figure out what to do about the houses that minimizes foreclosures and minimizes the number of houses dumped on the market and clears up the debt so consumers can spend again. And once you do that, then if you have to do literally dozens of different things to return to full steam again, it's harder to do if you've got a lot of people who are discouraged and afraid to take a risk and afraid to begin again. And it is because what is going on now is alien to the experience of people below a certain age. When I was born in my native state, we were the second poorest state in the country, and the per capita income of my state was barely half America's. I must have been 5 years old before I ever even met anybody that made more than $20,000 a year back then. But no one had any doubt that they could emerge from the Great Depression. Then when the economy slowed down in the late 50s and President Kennedy got elected saying it's time to get the country moving again, one of the reasons he could win and become our first Roman Catholic president against a lot of inbred prejudice is that nobody had any doubt that we could get out of the fix we were in. If they had been gripped with doubt, his campaign could not possibly have prevailed against all the forces that were against it. Why? Because there were enough people alive who had seen us emerge from things that were 20 times worse. So this is a small country that loves its past, but there's a difference in knowing it and feeling it. You got too many people here who have to play a role in your recovery who never felt the adversity that was the rule of life in Ireland that produce some of your greatest poetry, your greatest music, your greatest whatever. And so I really think, if not through I thought about the McCord chair because we were there raising money for it. There may be some better way, but I think we owe it to you, all of us who are of a certain age, to try to help change the mindset. In order to win this deal, you've got to get your game face on. Because we're going to live in a highly competitive world. There is one thing that this government cannot change. You can't change the fact that the world is awash in interdependence, that everybody's border looks more like a net than a wall, that people are competing for the future. What we have to decide is whether it's going to be a future of shared benefits and shared responsibilities or a winner-take-all future. Somebody's doing fine in Ireland today. Somebody was doing fine 2 days after the crash. You made a decision you didn't want that. You wanted a future of broadly shared prosperity. If you want it, once you get past your two big macroeconomic decisions, you have to do dozens of things. You cannot do dozens of things if you are paralyzed by disappointment. And so I really hope you won't think this is just rhetoric on my part. I think every day, every one of us gets up and makes 4 or 5 decisions before we're even conscious of it that determine whether this is going to be a good day or not. Are we going to make something good happen, or are we just going to wait for something bad to happen to us? Are we going to find the best in somebody, or are we going to wait for the worst to manifest itself? Everybody in the world thinks you've done an unbelievable job of managing a miserable situation. But that's cold comfort for the people that don't have enough money to buy a suit, much less make a mortgage payment and are worried they'll never have a job. I understand that. But you have to go get those people because you need them too. All of them. So I hope you will find a way to do that. Finally, let me say again, the whole idea here of concentrating on exports in the diaspora is a good idea. I wanted to thank John McCoglin for developing worldirish.com to connect the Irish people with international investors after the first Global Irish Economic Forum. The diaspora can do a bunch of those dozens of things. And I'll do my part when we have our meeting in New York. But in the end, what matters is what happens here and what happens within the mind and heart of every person living in Ireland. I think this should be viewed as an exciting time. After all, we learned what was wrong with global capitalism and with our economic model in a way that was painful, but nowhere near as devastating as the Great Depression. It was, like many of life's experiences, an expensive learning proposition, but it was nowhere near fatal. The only thing that could be fatal to us is if we don't respond with a new strategy that will leave us better off than we were before it began. I'll try to help you beat the 5 years. But you have to create the Ireland of the 21st century. Thank you.